We're here to talk about dandelions. If you can imagine, you're wondering what in the world we want to talk about dandelions for. And when I look at a little article that was in the journal about Friday, June 8th, and it says, dandelions must go. You know what? That was a headline 30 years ago. And it says, the battle never ends in this war of weeds. So we're weeds too. Anyhow, that was kind of unique that that came out. But we're going to talk about how this dandelion era evolved, basically from 1983 to about 1988, 89, and what all transpired during that time, and some of the effects of some of the things that happened in there, the 24-hour lockout, the spin-off thing, are really being felt today at this time, and playing major havoc with the so-called unionized construction industry. And we have some people here who are really highly involved with that, because they're a great panel, and they're gonna bring us through how all this happened and came about, and why we got there, and how we got to where we are today. Excuse me. So anyway, just to introduce myself, Jack Hubler. I'm a member of the ALHI Board of Directors and a few other things with Local 488 and the building trades, and keep myself occupied that way, and give a lot of work to Shirley and all that stuff, keep her busy too. Anyway, the painting you see was the original painting, painted by Shirley in 1985. Wow. Just getting, I guess, kind of getting really in there, feeling their way around and starting to realize they had something they could really offer to help what the dandelions were. Of course, what we're talking about, the dandelions we're talking about are human beings, and they were, of course, unemployed construction workers. And that's how the thing evolved, and that's why it evolved, because there were just vast amount of them, hundreds, sometimes thousands of these. And that's how the term dandelion, to some degree, started. Others are going to fill us in on how it really came about. Anyhow, to introduce our panel, right here, Ken MacKenzie from the IBEW, Local 424. Peter Fleming from the Teamsters Local. John Cavanaugh from the Boilermakers. And Martyn Piper from the Carpenters Union. Martyn can tell us his title later, but basically he's the business manager of the Carpenters Union. And Winston Gereluk. And Winston is everything to, he's done everything and makes it all happen.
I was going to sit in that chair.
Anyway, thank you all very much for being here. And we're going to kick it off, ladies and gentlemen, with Brother Fleming from the Teamsters. Brother Fleming is somehow or other came up with his name Dandelions. And he's going to tell us how that came about. And at this time, I'd like to call Peter up to tell us how that all happened.
Okay.
So they tell me.
Okay, good enough. Well, before I get into it, I want to tell you just exactly what it was like in them days. We were all buried up to our neck in sand, and the rules were we had to fight a bulldog. And if you tried to bite the bulldog, you got hit in the head with a briefcase loaded with anti-labor legislation, and you were told to fight fair. That's what we're up against. So it come about, sitting at home one night, we already started to have a few meetings at the Operating Engineers Hall. That the perfect symbol for us would be the dandelion. You can't get rid of it. It's constant, like men and working women all over this world, especially in Alberta. We're here to stay. No matter what they try or what they do, we're always here, we're constant. And a dandelion has got uses. You can make good wine from the flower. You can eat the leaf as a salad. You can roast the root and make a coffee substitute. We're all of those things. We're the salt of the earth. And nothing can take that away from us. What the dandelions had to do was start from the bottom and claw our way up. We had to learn a dirty game called politics. And we got to realize when their lips moved, they lied. We had to expose them. And the only way you could expose them is by being a true dandelion, not giving up. And what the politician couldn't stand, the ruling party, was embarrassment. They can't take embarrassment. One of the things we used to do would go to public town hall meetings the Conservatives held. And we'd flood the meeting with our members and take over the meeting and ask questions that were impossible to answer. And you could see the frustration breaking out and the sweat and looking at each other and getting awful uncomfortable. But I'll cut it short. That's what we were about. We never die. We're always here to stay. Thank you.
Thanks, Peter. I guess that's how it came about. And like the headlines in the journal say today, dandelions must go. That was certainly true then, and they certainly wanted them to go. And many times they wanted them to go away, but there were just too many of them. And anyway, thanks, Peter. That was just great. I'd like to call up Brother John Cavanaugh. John was a grassroots. The dandelion movement was a grassroots movement, for that matter, and that's how it flourished and made its inroads and could do what it had to do and could get meetings here and there. But John was a grassroots with the grassroots. And so anyway, John's going to tell us some things he encountered and what he went through in his time with a dandelion. John Cavanaugh.
Don't call me.
Well, when I first got involved with the dandelions, I was unemployed just like everybody else. There was kind of a little bit of consternation about how it was going to go and how we're going to demonstrate our cause. And nobody wanted to talk to the press. And I seen, no, we got to talk to the press. We got to talk to the people of this province. We got to tell them the truth. Walk over the lies. So we did. I was a projects coordinator. I went and seduced the press, talked to them, controlled them, everything. Got a hold of them. We're going to have a demonstration here. We're going to go see Alexander's thing over in Whitemud. We're going to flood that meeting, and we did. And we asked pertinent questions that they didn't want to hear or they didn't want to answer. And one of them, how come you got so much unemployment? When the premier of the province at the time said, we're not going to touch that savings or anything until it's a rainy day, and we told him, well, it's boring, fellas. We need something here. And I know at the time, many of you don't remember, but who was the second person that signed the national energy policy? We know who the first one was, because everybody in Alberta is supposed to hate him. Who was the second guy? Well, that was the premier of the province. ALHI signed it. So, you know, the way politics tell stories, they twist it to their own point. Here in Alberta, we're all told it was Trudeau, but it was actually two people that signed that thing. And a lot of other things that happened in this province in regards to labor issues were as two-faced as that. You know, even today, now, why I brought that old national energy policy up, we hear Redford saying we need a national energy plan. Kind of sounds familiar from about 30 years ago. You know, things haven't changed that much. Matter of fact, the labor movement today is in more stress with legislation thrown up in front of us. They had a conference with us there back in one of those years. They caught us out in front of City Hall, and they had a whole bunch of people lined up. We were all there. And along come Phillips for the CBC, and he wanted something contagious or confrontational, contagious, same thing. So they asked different people, and they got to me. One guy said we should be more like Japan and be more integrated with the labor movement and stuff like this, so you don't lay people off after the job is finished. You find something for them to do. They come to me and they ask me a funny question, and I give a funny answer, and I became famous all throughout Canada. Says to me, what do you think of the trickle-down theory? I says, well, man, I duck for cover because it's warm, wet, and amber-colored.
Thanks, John. That's how John became famous. And he heard it, and they were great. They were just great when they were out there doing their thing and causing havoc. But as you know, they're the main thrust of it, and I think others are going to do that. They took the blame away from. Everybody was at the outset was trying to blame the unions because it was a unions problem, that there was this mass unemployment and there was no work and all this stuff. This group was able to turn that around and turn it right back to put the unions back where it belonged, right on the government. And as you can tell, that's the type of people it took, and they did a great job of turning that around and making sure that everybody understood the problem laid down in that legislature building. Anyhow, another grassroots of the grassroots was Ken MacKenzie from the IBEW, and Ken, along with his colleagues here, played a major role in seeing this dandelion thing evolve and making the inroads it did, and doing the thing it did was not to make the grassroots known and have a say, and also that it took the blame away from the unions and put it where it belonged. Anyway, with that, I'd like to call up Ken.
Yeah. Brother, and I've got to point out, I haven't seen Brother Cavanaugh in, 15 years? Brother Pete, we met up last fall, and previous to that is 20 years, so we were just out there having coffee and reminiscing like crazy. We got a lot of catching up to do. But here's a little gift from the Dandelions. This is our symbol. They were made by construction workers, rough tough construction workers. If you can imagine, sitting around kitchen tables making dandelions. It kind of goes against the.
Remember, we're unemployed.
Yeah, we were unemployed. We sat around at the kitchen tables and did craft work and drank tea, and it was really against. It was contrary to the norm or the stereotype of the rough tough construction workers. And we sold those for $1. And I think our best year, which was probably 1987 or 86, I suppose.
86.
I think our biggest year, as far as funds, we had 10,000 in the kitty. That was that. We arranged dances and socials. We did that kind of thing, and everybody just chipped in, basically to keep the thing going. Some unions donated some cash.
The public.
The public, yeah, we got a lot of support from the public. It was building trades, initiated by unemployed building trades. When the 80s struck, when there was high unemployment, of course, we were out of work. We'd worked for a number of years. We were the highest paid blue collar workers in the country, and we were building the province. All the northern oil sands, the infrastructure in Edmonton and Calgary, right across the province. So we had some kind of an identity as tradesmen, and we had an identity as citizens. I mean, we understood that what we were doing was creating something, building something, assembling something that was in turn creating wealth and security for other people. And that gave us a strong identity as working people. So when the crisis hit, we were shocked. It was a big letdown for us. It wasn't supposed to happen because, as John said, we were always getting the propaganda. We've got another 25 years work. It's going to be booming. This is 40 years, whatever. We love you, construction workers. All this. But between the legislation, Bill 44 and Bill 110, the spin-off legislation, that's when we realized that who the enemy was and what we had to do. We didn't know what to do. In fact,
But we did, individual building trades locals would get together and form committees just to help their members deal with the crisis. There was the high unemployment, there was a lot of foreclosures in those days. Suicides, definitely, yeah, definitely there's a lot of suicides, depression. So it wasn't so much that we got together to fight the actual legislation. We came together as much to help each other out as to fight any kind of legislation. But from the individual committee meetings in the individual building trades halls, they would eventually, of course, getting around to discussing politics and forming their own individual PAC committees. And then at some point, this was before I got involved with it, at some point they decided, well, because all the individual locals were discussing the same things, the same issues, they had the same ideas. So what did we do? We decided, I think it was at the Operating Engineers Hall was the first meeting we had, and naturally we called it the Central Committee, right? Which was great. It was great. I loved it, the Central Committee, because we get, of course, the razzing of our own union leaderships and the general public, or whatever. There were a bunch of commies, whatever. Interestingly enough, the Dandelion Political Action Committee, it was almost apolitical, in that we did not, as a group, adhere to any one kind of political ideology or membership in any one particular party, because in the beginning, well, right through it, there was such a variety of views from extreme right to extreme left that we decided, no, we'll be apolitical in that sense, and we'll just simply reserve the right to criticize, and that worked really well for us, because we got over that. There was too many varied political options, if you will, for us to take a hard line on any one particular one, and that kept us together. We all understood each other. We all understood our condition, and certainly, just as today, there was a lot to criticize then. There was a hell of a lot to criticize, and that's what we did. We criticized our lot. We criticized the situation we were in. We criticized the government. We criticized our unions. We bitched and complained about a lot of different things. Also, I wanted to just to let you know that it wasn't all building trades either. There were unemployed people from different sectors, a variety of different groups. Every Monday morning we'd meet at the Carpenters Hall. The Carpenters were probably one of our best supporters or allies. They'd given us full use of their meeting hall, generous office space, telephone, copying machine, and secretarial service for $50 a month. So, in that regard, Carpenters should be congratulated and recognized for that. That really helped us along. But we got involved with a lot of different groups. We took on a lot of different targets. We brought in a lot of different speakers, a lot of people, sociologists from the university here, political scientists, science professors. We had everything from Nicaraguan union workers delegations come through and explain the situation to us. We had people from the Mondragon co-op in Spain asking us to consider the co-op movement to help us get over our financial situation that we were in. So we built a lot from there. It was interesting yesterday, the Gainer strike Vicky and the Meow brother Cardinal from Fort McMurray speaking on Meow, and the other UFCW brother from Red Deer. And I thought, oh well, we had something, we had a little insight into that. We were involved from the beginning, from the first hour of the Gainer strike, the first minute of the Gainer strike. And I'd like to think we helped out a little there. When we had the big rally, June 12th, in '86, one of our fellas came up with a great idea. He came up to me and he says, those 3 injured workers, those strikers at Fletcher's in Red Deer, they're in the hospital, their legs are broken. So we collected. And and I think it was like 10,000. Excuse me, I get choked up thinking about it. But in any case, yeah, we delivered, whatever it was, I think it was 10,000, 15. It was a good amount of money for these, we call them the heroes of Red Deer. But it was just a spontaneous act mentioned by one of our members that said it, hey, let's grab some Pepsi boxes, whatever we can. We went through that crowd of 10,000, buck up. We divided it by 3, and we took a representative. Was it you, Vicky, that came with us? Was it you, was it? It was, okay, I wasn't quite sure. Yeah, Sister Vicky. She came with us, and we delivered it at the hospital. And it was very heartwarming. It was great stuff. Another occasion, one of our members, there was a front page of the Sun. There was a bottle picker, an itinerant fellow, that street person, if you will, or whatever, lived in the bush out west of town, and he burned his little shack had burned down. And there's a picture of him standing there with his burnt cowboy hat. Whenever he was, I was in the Dandelion office. One of our members phoned. He said, "Did you see the paper? Did you see what happened to that guy?" I said, "Thank you very much." He said, "You see what happened to that fellow?" I said, "Yeah, that's really sad." He said, "I got a bunch of lumber in my backyard. I got lumber." He said, "I said, well, yeah, what?" He said, "I'd like to build a house for that guy, a little place for him, I said, "That's great, Clarence." Clarence was a carpenter. I said, "That's great." And next thing we knew, we built this skid shack, fully insulated, windows, doors. It was everything. We went to the public. The public donated food, furniture, whatever. We got the front page of the Sun on this thing. Clarence had taken him to one of the Western stores and come in and told the manager, "You're going to give this brother here, this working man, you're going to give him a full cowboy outfit, right?" So that was, those are some of the things we did that were initiated by one individual coming up with an idea, and the rest of us getting a hold of it and going with it, running with it. It was a great opportunity. What I found with the Dandelions were the most democratic, free, open, egalitarian outfit or group that I ever had the occasion to work with. We discussed things, we'd hash it out. At our meetings, initially, everybody had to get everything off their chest. They had to core dump. And because we were union members, we understood Robert's Rules of Order, so we could run effective meetings. And that was a leg up on oddly enough, or you wouldn't think it, but just having that knowledge of how to run a meeting, effective meeting, and we rotate chairs and executive or whatever. We registered ourselves under the Societies Act. I could go on and on and on, but let's tell stories for the heck. I think I'll leave it at that for now. Any questions later? Thanks very much. One more thing, my apologies. I like to go on. Shut me up, please.
You go.
I just want to thank ALHI. We all want to thank ALHI for the great work they've done, and it's been great that we're very pleased that you invited us. And by the way, I'm here not in my capacity as a union agent. I'm here as a working man in a Dandelion. But one of the things I do as an agent with the intake is of new members who basically know nothing about unions. At some point, I say, just imagine you wake up in the morning and there was no unions. There were no unions. And I try to get to them, imagine what it'd be like what kind of society it'd be like without a union. But with ALHI, I'm thinking, well, where would the labor movement be without ALHI? Right now, I mean, the work that they do is so essential. It's needed. It's a great thing. I applaud you guys.
Oh, thank you very much, Ken. That was just great. That kind of gave us an insight as to what was all happening at that time in our society and the industry, in particular, the unionized construction industry. Ken had touched on the one of where Clarence, I think he was a Cavanaugh too.
Yeah, there was an Irish-Scottish connection there, of course.
Clarence was from Newfoundland.
Oh, okay.
He was a carpenter.
Anyway, they did build that little house for the gentleman, and that was great. During this period of time, of course, there was just people scrambling everywhere to try to get work and try to drive a cab or drive a truck or do some damn thing. But anyway, one particular brother that I'm familiar with, he went selling furniture. And his name was Leon. I wonder if you can guess where he went to work. He went to work for Leon. And so we had a good time. There's Leon right there. And he stayed there the whole time, sold furniture. And I know amongst the group, in our Dandelion group that I was associated with, if you needed furniture, we said, go to Leon's at Leon's. So there, Leon's just got a plug from us. And you got a plug too, Leon. Anyway, that was great that you were there, because I know we bought what we could afford. Because you had not bad prices. They were pretty good.
And I kept my dues up all those years,
Kept your
too.
dues up all those years. Great for you. Anyway, another little story. Anyhow, what I'd like to do this time, call up Martyn Piper. Martyn has a big role to play today in his organization, and he played a big role then. And he's going to bring us up to speed in what transpired then, in between, and maybe even right now. So, Martyn Piper.
Thank you. Thanks for the opportunity to be here. And as Ken has said, I welcome the opportunity to be here because I think it's important to remember the history of this province. And I either had the misfortune or the good fortune to come to Canada, had a good time, and then quickly things went sour. I came to Canada in 1975 as a journeyman carpenter, and I was a member of the Labour Party in Britain, and I was a trade unionist over there. And so I kind of took things slowly when I came here in 75 and worked my way onto the executive of the local union in Calgary. As you know, that's the bastion of socialism in this country. And joined the New Democrats and thought that we'd make some progress there, but as you know, that's a tough tough road to hoe. But I want to tell you that for the 70s, it was actually not a bad time. I worked as a carpenter on the tools in Calgary primarily, and was politically active during those times. I got to hear Tommy Douglas speak, which was absolutely unbelievable. An individual I'll never forget. And Grant Notley and many other wonderful politicians in this province who I hope one day would be either elected in Canada or in the province. But quickly, as the 80s came about, and one can blame the National Energy Program or not, I choose not to, and Marc Lalonde and Pierre Trudeau. But what we saw is all this work in the late 70s in Calgary in the construction industry and in Alberta generally, in the north and the oil sands and so on. But as the 80s started to come upon us with the National Energy Program, if that's what caused it, and as I said, I'm not convinced it did, we had lockout notices arrive at the office. I became a business agent in 1981, but I wasn't one of those that really conformed to the rules. I was one of the rabble and really didn't like strict organization, so I was very much an activist and a militant in the organization and always out looking for organizing. Some of us recognized back then that organizing was really the future. Others didn't. Others just liked the institution and signing people up, and members came into the unions. And I think one of the failures of the building trade has always been that we've never properly educated. I think it's true of the trade union movement. People come into unions, but they don't really know why. They either come in because they have to, because it's a closed shop, or they come in because it's a hiring hall in the building trade. And that's sadly missed. And like my brothers have said here today, I think that's something we need to continually work on. In fact, this whole event has given me ideas about bringing people like Vicky and Dave and some of my colleagues here to my union meetings to talk to young people about what unions really stand for, because as you all know, it's a much larger perspective than just a collective bargaining agreement. It's a social progressive movement, and if we ever lose that thread, we really have lost something. But think about it, here the lockout notices come along, and suddenly all this work, we have none, and we're told tomorrow the wages, terms and conditions are extinguished, and if people want to come back to work for union companies, these are the rates and pay and the terms and conditions of employment, if you were lucky to have a job. And during that time, bargaining was going on, and there were, the employers were asking for huge concessions, major concessions, and not that would have created work. Well, that would have just driven us down to the lowest common denominator. So what you started to see, and I'm going to move quickly through the chronology of events, but what you started to see happening was union companies opening up non-union shops, as we knew them as spin-off double-breasted companies. The government was enabling them at the time, and for all the wonderful things that have been said about Peter Lougheed, I can tell you that for me he was a conservative, always will be a conservative, and Les Young and all the rest of them that were around at that time. And the sad thing is, like today, most politicians don't understand Labour. They don't understand Labour legislation. They, you know, either ignorance, they didn't know what they were doing, or maybe some of them did, and maybe they were on a mission. And so if you think about through the 80s, what happened was not only were we locked out, as my colleagues have said, there was absolute despair. I was a young business agent, and I'm not a trained counsellor or psychologist. And when you've got grown men and their wives and families in your office telling you about their mortgages underwater, because you remember the interest rates went out of sight at that time, they were out of work, they had no work, no prospect of work, particularly in the North, people were given anything to have a maintenance job at that time, but there was nothing. And I can tell you, in my own union at that time, we had 4 or 5 suicides. It was absolute despair. Now imagine being a young business agent. I knew the trade union business and the collective bargaining business, but I didn't know how to counsel people. And it was a horrible, horrible time. So that got my back up. And I got angry. I was getting a paycheck. We actually went on job share, UIC job sharing at that time in the office in Calgary to preserve staff jobs. That's how bad things got. So I quickly got frustrated with the building trades in Calgary, and when I was a member of the IBEW, and I don't think he'd mind if I said his name today, Harold Taylor. He was an old-time, you know, believed in the big international institution. But what he didn't understand is that we had to take this government on. And I was the architect of 20-plus buses out of Calgary, McMahon Stadium, and Medicine Hat and Lethbridge to come to the rally of a Bill 110. I got on the Fed executive, Winston was there and others, and you know, I had the great fortune of probably being on an executive board with one of the greatest Labour leaders that ever walked in this province, and Dave Worthing, and I have no qualms about saying that. Because I thought I knew the business, but Dave knew the business like nobody else. And you know, whether we were talking about Central America and South America and Chile and Nicaragua and El Salvador, or whatever we were talking about, I even remember Dave talking about the export of bull semen from Central Alberta, and I'm driving home. I'm not kidding you. I drove home on Friday night from an AFL executive board meeting thinking, how am I going to explain this to my members? I was at an AFL executive meeting, and Dave Worthing's talking about this export of trade for bull semen. But to go back to the Dandelions, you know, people were desperate, and when you're desperate, you do desperate things. And structure and organization doesn't mean anything to you anymore. It doesn't. You're desperate. You'll do anything. And members of the building trades, particularly in the north, but in the south, I remember plumbers and pipe fitters, I can name them, and other trades, operating engineers, quickly the Dandelion spread to Calgary. And I was, because I was this young sort of guy, even though I was a business agent, seen as, hey, Martyn will do it, and Martyn will do this, and Martyn will do that. And I got into trouble with some of the more senior agents around the building trades who didn't like what I was doing. But I can remember one particular event, and it creates a bit, you know, a bit of levity here in the discussion. I don't think even these guys might know this. I never forget, there was about 100 of us, I think, and we hid around the corner of the convention center in Calgary, had all the Dandelion signs and the green hats and the lapel pins. And Peter Lougheed was in some conservative luncheon event at the convention center. And we hid out, and we knew exactly the time we were going to hit the convention center. And I'm not kidding you, we were outside these doors, and these security guys see us coming, and they're all cowering and didn't know what to do. I mean, you got these construction guys, nothing was going to get in their way. And somehow we figured it out. He was on the podium speaking, and he was up on some stage, and the next thing the doors opened and 100 Dandelions came in, screaming and shouting and placards and the whole bit, and Laurie just went like that. But we used to go out to job sites and do coffee mornings and try and get in the face of politicians. And fortunately, I had a business manager who didn't mind me doing that. And so, you know, that was a time when as these guys have pointed out, rank and file, I was getting a paycheck, but rank and file people were taken to the streets. And you know, the sad part about it is we're still in that place today, as my colleagues have pointed out. If you don't know, the legislation in construction industry is still under attack as we speak. I just had a letter yesterday. But let me just talk about that time quickly, if I might, Jack, just take a few minutes. Think about the 80s. We had gainers. I came up here a number of times, and Vicky, you know, I'll never forget her being on the top of that trailer, shouting on and on and on with that tannoy, you know, and think about this, you know, what am I? I'm probably in my 30s at this time. I never thought in Canada I would ever see police marching down the street with riot gear on. I thought I was in some Central or South American country. Unbelievable. And then I had some carpenters with me, an old Yugoslav at that time, partisan from the Second World War, and he was as left as they come. And he was ambling along by the fence. Somebody just put a big ball-bearing ball through a truck. And I'll never forget this SWAT guy came up and grabbed him and cuffed him, and several others. And I remember staying up here that night, we were bailing these guys out of jail. But what happened was, you know, for once, and it's never happened enough, we had the building trades and organised labour together, galvanised by a round of strike at Fletcher's and certainly at Gaynors. And you know, if nothing else, what a wonderful feeling to be part of such a large movement of people that really thought and saw the world the same way as we did, and a place where the Dandelions could you know, feel a home. So, you know, just very quickly then to sort of wrap up, also what happened at that time, Jack, you remember this, Brian Strong got elected for the NDP in St Albert. I mean, the building trades got it about political action, and good for them, and the electricians, Ver nearly got elected in Jasper Place with Les Young. Of course, I'm in Calgary only wishing that we could get some NDP politician elected, you know, against the likes of Rick Orman and Jim Denning and all these other guys that were running around down there. But it was a very, very interesting time, and I think what it shows is that when people are out of work and they're desperate, they will do whatever it takes to try and turn the corner. And really, you know, the story of the Dandelions through the Labour Institute or otherwise needs to be repeated time and time again, because sometimes you just have to break the rules and you have to go above and beyond and do what you got to do to get where you need to be. And I don't have to tell anybody in this room, I mean, this battle will never end. It's lifelong, it's here forever, and we can go for all the economic spin about our working people better off today, and I always say working people are worse off today, because people like to show you that, you know, their travel trailer in the park and their motorbike in their car, and I see it, and then I turn around and say to these guys, yeah, but do you actually own that? Or do you owe for it? And most of us in our economic world are economic slaves to the system we're in. And that's why people can't take time away from work. That's why we're afraid to strike, is because we owe debt and we owe credit. And working people, I don't think, are any better off today than we were back in the 70s and 80s. Just my very, very final comment, and I missed, is think about this. What happened in the 80s for us in the building trades particularly? The merit contractors. The merit contractors. I got in with a friend of mine, a colleague, into an event at SAIT where this guy from the open shop in the US came up to speak to these contractors and some of these people who saw the beginning of the merit contractors. And I'll never forget, this guy was from the southern Gulf Coast, and he called tradespeople donkeys. That's the words he used, donkeys. And he numbered them, 1 donkey, 2 donkey, and 3 donkey. They were never, as they claim to be today, they were never supportive of apprenticeship back then. You were called trainee 1, trainee 2, trainee 3. And the only reason they now support apprenticeship is they realise politically it's the right thing to do. But that was the beginning of the merit shop. A guy called Willard Kirkpatrick, who came, the name just escapes me. He saw this opportunity to now, as the building trades were weak through the 80s, to come in and change this industry forever, and they did. And they have. And if you've ever heard me on the radio, I've been sued for $1 million over calling these guys parasites and Clack and everybody else. And then Clack was actually around in the late 70s. MBS, Gillette Construction, 2 major companies, but they really weren't on the landscape in any way, shape or form. But the 80s gave them an opportunity to get some opportunity, and they've grown, and you know what they're all about today, not only in our industry, but in healthcare and other industries and long-term care and so on and so forth. But we have never, ever got back to where we were. Merit's here in a big way, open shop, and so is Clack. And that's a thorn in our sides, and it's causing us trouble. We're competing with these people, and the client owners love those people. You know, it keeps, as they like to say, the playing field competitive. So just to go back to the point, I mean, I got to look at these 3 guys who were unemployed at the time and trying to probably feed families and pay rents and mortgages and meat payments, and you know, the bravery and the courage of people at Gainers, the bravery and the courage of people in the Dandelions. I think, you know, sometimes we just need to take a step back and say, you know, for all the troubles in the world where people lose their lives and do things, you know, in Alberta we have our own heroes, and 3 of them sitting here today. Thank you.
Excellent, Martyn. Wow. You gave us a great recap. And yeah, it's not very pretty out there today, even for that matter. He's touched on a couple of things that are, that 24-hour lockout, the way it was implemented. And I know in Local 488, it was July of 1984. That's when we got the lockout, and it never really got a collective agreement of sorts till well into the 90s. So it played havoc then, and it's played havoc now with our industry. Bill 110 was introduced, and Martyn mentioned 20-some buses coming in from Calgary and where else, and thousands from around the Edmonton and Northern Alberta area. The bill was never passed and put into legislation, but it didn't have to, because the die was cast. The contractors knew then that the government was on their side, and they could just keep spinning off, and we give them different names. We could organize them as fast as we could organize them. They could come up with a new name, and we just couldn't keep up to it all. And that's kind of where we're at today. Anyway, thanks again, Martyn. That really gave us a good recap, and thanks to everybody. But I would like to call up another gentleman who saw all this happen and was doing some research and doing a lot of reports and all that stuff, and which he does a great job at. And I'm sure he's got some insight into how this all happened, and that's Winston Gereluk.
I wonder if I could sit here. I've got a loud voice. My dad was a Baptist, and he didn't believe in sparing the rod. And when you got a father like that, you develop good vocal cords. I'm not feeling very well, and I'm kind of dizzy, so I'll just sit here. Some people think I've been dizzy for a long time. At that time, Jack's right. I was watching from more or less the outside. I was on the executive of the Alberta Federation of Labour. I was a vice president. I was working as the education director for the Alberta Union of Provincial Employees. And I got elected on the executive in '79 and went from there. Well, by the time that the Dandelions got started, I'd been deprived of my job. Just take advice from me. If you're ever in the staff of a union and you don't like the president and you go to the convention to campaign against him, make sure that he doesn't win. That was 1984. But I watched it developing, because it was developing much before that time. When Dave Worland got elected president in '83, he developed an activist group around him on the executive. In a way, it was his central committee. Okay, and we used to do a lot of things together. So even though I was working for the Alberta Union of Provincial Employees, writing briefs, I was, or teaching their courses, I was also helping with the research and writing of briefs with people like Jim Selby. This is Jim Selby's mother. Her name's not Mary. And we watched it developing from 1981, when the oil prices started plunging. We were in the midst of, the grip of an era of Thatcherism and Reaganism. For them to blame the National Energy Program for all of the bad things that happened is just totally dishonest and stupid and pretty typical of our politics. Because for the life of me, when I read the articles of the National Energy Program, I still have to figure out to this day what was wrong with the idea. But they blamed it for everything, and they got away with it.
Blamed it on one guy instead of two.
That's right. And of course, the oil prices dipped twice. And so, we had this stuff going on. Larry Pratt at that time, a political scientist, was doing a lot of writing, and he explained very carefully how what we were actually facing at that time, with the oil prices and everything, was a capital strike, because the oil industry wanted to get its way. So it wasn't enough that in one fell swoop, when the All Sands plant went down in 1982, you remember that? That was kind of the death knell. Premier Lougheed had in one fell swoop given him $5.4 billion in incentives on top of all of the other incentives, just in one crack, at the same time as he was depriving public sector employees of their jobs and pay increases and cutting back on services. It was starting then. So of course we had a lot of briefs to write. We had a lot of research to do, right, Dave? We had to explain to Les Young how the 25-hour lockout was not a good thing. And to this day, I'm not sure he got it. Well, I'm sure he did. I'm sure they knew exactly what they were doing. But nonetheless, you write briefs, you present your briefs, you don't have a hope in hell of them listening to you. The double-breasting and the spin-offs. There was a case of Packard Concrete in Calgary, and I forget which union it was. I think back then it was the Cement Lime Gypsum Union. They took them to court because that was one of the court cases, and indeed one of the political actions that showed us that the Alberta government intended to sit back and let all this carnage happen in the trade union movement. And Packard locked out its employees, and then they brought in a bunch of people in the middle of the lockout. Apparently you have to unlock the gate to do that, and brought them into work. So the question became, can you operate during a lockout? And indeed it was established that you could, and yeah, government ministers shook their head. So suddenly you can operate after you've locked the doors to the place. Go figure. Okay, there was another case, the operating engineers and the Road Builders Association, a year or two after that, established, many people were taking on the question of whether or not the 25-hour lockout was legitimate. Because, collective agreements have bridging clauses. And the only way that you can end a collective agreement then is by strike or lockout. That's what it says in the labor code. Well, they just locked them out for 24, 25 hours, then hired them back on individual contracts of employment. And that's sort of the way it went. So we'd write briefs explaining how that wasn't right. And they didn't listen. So, the situation was developing quite nicely. 1982 then, the trade union leaders in North America, in their wisdom, decided that it would really help the cause if the building trades withdrew from the Alberta Federation of Labour. And in 1982, that's what happened. They withdrew. And of course, it didn't stop people like Dave Worland or the executive we had from saying, we don't care. We're going to make common cause with the construction trades who are under fire. Because if you slam one segment of the labor movement, you're slamming every other segment. And any true trade unionist would know that to be the case. So, so we kept working with them. Martyn mentioned the merit shop. Well, you only have to turn on your radio these days if you want to get really sick. I don't think that's what made me feel sick, but the merit shop ads that are on there. The Koch brothers from the United States, the people who bankrolled the Tea Party, are in Alberta. Any surprise that they would come to Alberta first? Well, they are here. And they're repeating exactly the same language that they were repeating back then. And you watch, that right-to-work legislation is going to come back again, going to rear its ugly head, and that's what happened too. Then you have, of course, the governments in their wisdom talking about how, we're going to have to cut back public services exactly at that time. So adding to the dismal economic times and the lack of work for construction workers was all this stuff, the Reaganism happening in Canada, the cutbacks of the public sector. All of these things were happening to create an economic context, in which it was very, very easy for the government to say, well, go ahead, kick the shit out of the building trades. We'll let you do it. And that's exactly what happened. And will we ever learn our lessons? As Martyn said, we need the trade union education. It's got to be a lot of historical education, so people don't think that it's happening for the first time. We've got to stick together on these things. I think that's really where I'll wrap it up. I just wanted to give you a little bit of the context in which it happened, and to tell you that just because you can write a good brief doesn't mean you're going to stop it.
My, how things have changed. Huh?
Yeah.
Thanks, Winston. That's very good.
I wonder if I can I just wanted to read what Brad Bullock from the Carpenters had to say.
Okay.
We worked in ALHI to do a number of interviews. When I interviewed Brad, I just about started to cry listening to him. I'd heard that story too. Here's what he said. One day you were working for a union company with a full benefit package. and a full rate. And 24 hours later, you were working for a non-union company at what I figured to be a 65% pay cut. It was devastating to anybody that had a mortgage, a car payment, or a family, such as me. We lost members, some lost their lives through suicide. There were many marriage breakups. People lost their homes, lost their vehicles. In 1984, before the Dandelions got started, people were selling their homes for $1 to get out of the liabilities. Yeah.
20% interest rate.
Yeah, 20%. Thanks.
On the 24-hour lockout, I'd just like to run through that. I have a daughter that's a lawyer and a son-in-law that's a lawyer. So I try to, give some image that I know a little bit about the law, and I really don't. But anyhow, the 24-hour lockout, it was tried in other provinces, but in every province, and the labor board, I guess, with the push from the various governments throughout the country, they said, yeah, go ahead, do the 24-hour lockout. Well, if you lock out, you stay locked out. If you end the lockout, you go back to the collective agreement. And that's what happened in every province in Canada, except one. And guess which one? That one was right here in Alberta. So that's what happened with the 24-hour lockout. And that's how some of the other provinces were able to gain a little bit on us in the way of legislation and what have you. But because only here was the 24-hour lockout allowed to happen in its full what its mission was, and it did great. Anyway, just can't say enough about this panel. Holy smokes, what a great panel, and great big thanks to them anyway. One other brother I'd like to introduce, and maybe he wants to say a few words, is Ezekiel Gow. Ezekiel is a student here at the university, and I don't know if he was forced into it or chosen, but anyway, he's here with us and to observe what we did and what we talked about and what all the panel talked about. And if Ezekiel wants to say a few words, we'd be very glad to hear that.
So I was asked to provide a little bit of a youth perspective to what we've heard here today, and I just want to start by saying it's a real honor to hear these stories of the movement in the 80s and the labor problems and the economic problems that face the country in the 1980s. I think it's really important, especially for people of my generation, to remember that people have faced labor problems before. They've faced problems with the government, and that we should not try to reinvent the wheel every 20 years. It's very common for friends of mine even to say, why do I have to pay union dues? Why am I in a union? Why are they taking money from me? And I think listening to stories from these gentlemen really drives home the point why we have the unions and the protections and benefits that we do get from the union. So I think it's really important to listen to these stories and listen to the stories of the past, but also have a vision of the future. So, I have a vision of a future where more rights are given to workers and more protections are given in the workplace, and where we have governments that care about the people and put the people first before the profits of large corporations. So I just think that it's fantastic to hear these stories, and it's fantastic what ALHI is doing in recording these stories, because if we don't record them, they will be lost to us, and we will have to reinvent the wheel every 20 years, which would just put us back every 20 years. And that I don't think that would be very good at all. So I just want to say to these gentlemen what an honor it is to be here, and thank you for having me here to give a little bit of a youth perspective.
Thanks, Ezekiel.
Jack, I wonder if I can just respond. Anytime I see a student, I have to automatically start lecturing. I've been doing it all my life. But just one word, given. Working people were never given anything throughout history. That's the major lesson. Never once did the powerful elite sit back and say, it's time we gave the working class something. In every case, any protection we had, any benefit we had, every one of them had to be fought for.